All right, let's talk about something we've probably all felt at some point. What happens when you say yes to something, but deep down, it doesn't really feel like your choice?
I mean, seriously, think about it. Have you ever been in a situation where you agreed to a deal, but there was this little voice in your head screaming, this isn't right? Maybe it was some super aggressive salesperson, or maybe it was pressure from someone you really trusted. You said yes, but was it a real choice?
Well, it turns out the legal system actually has a name for this exact feeling. The law gets that not all agreements are made on a level playing field, and it calls this particular problem undue influence.
So what does that mean, really? Well, undue influence is what happens when somebody uses their power or, a close, trusting relationship to basically corner someone else into a contract they'd never agree to otherwise. We're not talking about obvious threats here. It's way more subtle than that. It's like this psychological weight that just crushes a person's ability to say no.
Yeah, for the person who's going through it, it doesn't feel like a negotiation at all. It just feels like there's only one way out. Agreeing isn't a choice, it's just giving in. It's an act of surrender.
Okay, so if the law knows this is a problem, what's the fix? This is where a really interesting part of the law called equity comes in. You can almost think of equity as the law's fairness department, and it has this incredibly powerful tool, kind of like a giant undo button for contracts.
And this whole undo process, it's called rescission. It's basically a three-step journey. First, you've got to prove in court that there was undue influence. If you can do that, then bam, step two, the contract is officially set aside. And finally, the court does its best to put everyone back where they started financially, just like the deal never even happened.
The whole point is to just wipe the slate clean. For all legal purposes, that agreement is treated like it never existed in the first place. That's a pretty powerful solution, right? It sounds simple enough. You get unfairly pressured, the court hits the undo button. But like a lot of things in law, there's a catch. That right to undo the deal, well, it's not always a sure thing.
So, on the one hand, the court gives you this amazing protection against being exploited.
But that protection isn't guaranteed forever.
Yep, there are actually situations where you can lose your right to rescind. And to really get our heads around why that is, we've got to look at this one landmark case that just lays it all out perfectly. So let's dive into the case that really sets the stage here. It's a famous English case from way back in the 19th century called Allcart versus Skinner. And the story involves a woman, a religious sisterhood, and a whole lot of money and property. So here's the quick rundown. Back in 1871, a Miss Allcart joins this religious order and signs over all of her property to them. 8 years later, in 1879, she leaves. But, and this is the key part, she doesn't try to get her property back until years after that. You got to pay attention to that delay because that's where this whole story turns. What the court decided is just fascinating. They actually agreed that Miss Allcart had been under undue influence. I mean, her relationship with the head of the order was one of absolute spiritual trust. But the court still ruled against her. So why? Simple. She waited too long. Once she was out of the sisterhood and free from that influence, she didn't act. And that really brings us to the biggest takeaway from this whole thing. The right you have to cancel a contract because of undue influence, it doesn't last forever. It has an expiry date. If you're free from the pressure and you just do nothing for a reasonable amount of time, the law basically says, well, you must be okay with it. Your silence ends up confirming the deal. So, if you remember just one thing from all of this, let it be this. The law gives you a powerful shield to protect you from unfair pressure, but it's a shield that you have to pick up and use yourself. If you delay, it can be absolutely fatal to your claim. This whole thing leaves us with a really tough question, doesn't it? The law is constantly trying to balance two huge ideas, getting justice for the person who was wronged, but also making sure that transactions have some sense of finality and certainty. The case of Allcart versus Skinner shows us exactly where the line was drawn back then, but you have to wonder, is that line in the right place? Now that's something to think about.